Kristen Scott, you'd suggested that we do a top 10 list revolving around concept albums. I'm going to do that, however, I'm going to put a couple of restraints in place. That way we can actually expand this list in the future to include other albums. So here are the 3 restrictions that are in place. 1, it has to be done from a heavy metal artist, which means that progressive rock is, it's really kind of out, but I can definitely see where some people may make a argument for maybe one band that might be on here, but I really don't think so. So it's going to be a lot of potato there. Second of all, I've had to have heard it in order for it to be on this list. And 3, this is not a definite top 10 list. This is 10 of the best heavy metal concept albums, and really we're going to be talking about closer to probably 13. So let's have me shut up about the introduction and rules and all this other garbage, and let's actually get into it. So number 10, we have Nocturnus with The Key. This was a death metal album released in 1990, or the early 1990s, that actually took the unique concept of not trying to thwart Christianity, as it seems like a lot of death metal bands or a lot of extreme metal bands tend to have as a theme in their album, but instead it eliminates it entirely and gives it a very unique, very dystopian spin on what the society would be like without it. It's very interesting. It's a tremendous disc by this band. It's often overlooked by a lot of individuals. This band is often overlooked by a lot of people as well. This is a death metal band that was also in that realm in the first portion of the 90s, where they were starting to take the earliest versions of the death metal sound and give it a little bit more depth. There's some progressive tones in here. There's some synths used. Some real groundbreaking stuff was happening on this album, and to have the concept thrown in there to botch, it certainly makes the whole entirety of this disc extremely unique for the time, but also a fantastic listen. I highly recommend it. Number 9, we have Light of Day, Day of Darkness by Green Carnation. This is a one-song album that spans more than 60 minutes and is absolutely phenomenal. After the demise of Emperor, the former members of the group were all kind of handling their own solo works, and this is one by The Court. And Green Carnation was a group that was originally going to be the project that he was in before he became a part of Emperor. So the remainder of the band, whenever The Court left to go to play with Emperor, formed a band called In the Woods, which is phenomenal. But getting back to Light of Day, Day of Darkness, this is extremely well made. This is a very great orchestral album that really showcases a lot of the best tones of heavy metal. It showcases both the side of the light and the dark, in terms of the vocals, in terms of the musical composition. It's just very well put together. It was extremely ambitious at the time for the number of tracks that were being used on this album, which is now no longer all of that uncommon. But back then, this was definitely a labor of love that really, he sunk his heart and soul into this with the rest of the members of Green Carnation, and just produced a wildly amazing album. Number 8, we have Abigail by King Diamond. Now, you could probably put just about any King Diamond album in at this level, considering King Diamond likes to perform and write and record in stories. And Abigail is not only one of the most famous stories that he has told, but it's also one of the best. There are others that I really love from King Diamond, such as The Eye. The Eye is a fantastic album, but Abigail is the place where a lot of the conceptual charm really returns to a lot of individuals in the heavy metal scene, considering this was one that was done in the latter portion of the 80s, where concept albums were kind of getting really back into vogue after being sort of out of sorts for a little while. We're going to be talking about a couple of other late 80s gems from this department that really showcase the ability for the concept album to really shine. Tremendous story, extremely tragic, definitely one where King Diamond's vocal range is one of the focal points, but at the same time you also have to look at the cast of players that are on this album, including names such as Andy LaRocque. It's just a phenomenal lineup, not to mention it's just a kick-ass album that just does everything right and really showcases just how great concept albums really can be. Number 7, we have Crimson 1 and 2. I'm throwing in the second one, by Edge of Sanity. This was an idea that actually spawned a sequel, and unlike a band we're going to be talking about later, the sequel was just as good as the first one. But whenever Crimson first came out, Dan Spano was crafting this just tremendous one-song, 40-minute-long project that included Mike Eckerfe from Opeth doing some vocal work and some guitar work, and the result was absolutely mind-blowing. This album is legendary in its own right, and it's one where you can follow along with the story with the lyrics are included. And whenever the second one came out, a lot of people wondered why it needed to happen, considering the first one seemed to tie a lot of things up, but also seemed like you wouldn't want to mess with perfection, considering many people consider Crimson 1 to be absolutely perfect. The second one did not really live up to the hype of Crimson 1, but nothing really was going to, but it was still a darn good album by its own, and stands on its own very well. This is another example where something that probably didn't need tampered with, got tampered with, and was handled pretty well, mainly because it was being handled by the creators. There were not really that much in the way of newcomers coming in, and plus Dan is very meticulous. He's a mastermind. He's a great producer, not to mention a fantastic artist in his own right. So definitely give Crimson 2 as well as Crimson 1 a shot. Number 6, we are talking about Pain of Salvation, specifically the albums Remedy Lane and The Perfect Element. Now, some people would say B, some people would say maybe some of their older albums, but I really like these two. These are the two albums that not only got me into the band, but also I feel two of them where the concept is just really, really well done. Some people may even argue Road Salt would be a great pick for these, but I really like Remedy Lane because it's a very heartbreaking story that is really showcased very well by the instrumentals and the overall composition of the works. And the same thing happens with The Perfect Element. I mean, Pain of Salvation is a phenomenal progressive metal band just in general. Their usage of tone and music to set mood and to really showcase emotion is probably one of the best that you're ever going to see, period. These guys really know how to set a mood and set a tone based around the music that they play around it. Now, The Perfect Element was actually The Perfect Element Part 1. It did kind of get a sequel in the middle portion of the 2000s, though there's been a lot of debate based around whether or not that's legit or if that's something that's more of a joke or anything like that, because it really didn't seem to really mesh very well. But in reality, these two albums mesh tremendously. They stand on their own very well, and the stories will just leave you really hanging on by a thread with each passing track, and that's the sign of a good album. Number 5, we have Leviathan by Mastodon. Now, obviously, whenever you think of Leviathan, you think of the trademark cover, you think of Moby Dick, you think about Moby Dick the book, and you realize that Leviathan is a concept album and a well-put-together one. This is before Mastodon really became a major label act. It was really before they became a powerhouse, and really they were showcasing their abilities prior to all of that. The only difference was that their sound has morphed a little bit ever since, and a lot of true fans will really kind of clamor for that old song, that old sound rather. This is a terrific album. It's one that is able to really do not only the book justice, but also kind of give it a new sense of depth and density by really putting the music behind it and really giving it a lot of great prose to sort of accompany it. This is definitely a very well put together album by a group of guys that knew exactly what they were doing and wanted to make sure that it was honorable not only to the work, but also would be one that would maybe encourage some people to check out the book that hadn't prior. This is certainly a great album that really kind of foretold the Mastodon legend that was to come. You know, back then we had no idea that these guys were going to be one of the most popular metal bands on the planet, though it was being foreshadowed by albums such as this one. And for 2, we had no idea that they were going to be so popular with the people that they come in second place in Music Madness 3 years in a row. Yeah, that's a subtle plug. Number 4, we have My Arms, Your Hearse by Opeth. Now, my favorite Opeth album is Still Life, and I feel like that is a concept album, but that's neither really been confirmed nor denied, so there's still a lot of debate out there about whether or not Still Life is. But even with that said, from the traditional sense and the traditional idea of a concept album, My Arms, Your Hearse is one, and it is terrific. This is one where the song titles literally bleed into the next track, and it's one that almost signals the change. It kind of makes naming songs kind of easy, you know, in a way, but at the same time, musically, this is just a step up 100%. Whenever you think about the Opeth discography and you think about the 2 albums that preceded it, whenever you think about Orchid and Morning Rise, damn, really, really strong albums by themselves, but then you put together My Arms, Your Hearse, and you really just absolutely start crushing it and just absolutely start showcasing the full depth of your persuasion, not to mention get a little bit of that help from the production. And this album just sounds evil, it sounds amazing, it sounds sinister, but at the same time sounds heartbreaking. It's got so many things going for it that it just stands so proudly on its own. It's a wonderful album. Number 3, we have Seventh Son of the Seventh Son by Iron Maiden. Some people will overlook this as a concept album, but this is one where the reason why they do is because the songs themselves stand tall on their own without the need to know that it's a concept album. And this is a great disc. It's probably my favorite Iron Maiden album, though that's a constant debate among my own brain. But it's one that showcased the band doing something a little bit different comparatively to their older work, or actually building a whole entire album based around a concept instead of building a song based around a concept or a book or a work of some variety. And it worked really, really well for the band. This is a terrific disc. All of the songs definitely have that charm that give them a reason to be replayed, and you can replay which ones that you like, though replaying the whole entire album is simply easier, should I say, because all of the albums, or all of these songs are great, and it's so good it can't make senses right now. It sucks. Number 2, we have Metropolis 2, Scenes from a Memory by Dream Theater. This is obvious as can be, principally because this is an album that was started based off of a song, and it's a full album that just totally redefines and totally crushes the idea of what a concept album is all about. Taking it through scenes, taking it through many perspectives, taking it through many eras, through the eyes of one individual, meeting different people, and this is just probably the peak point for Dream Theater. You know, this is the album that they will never be able to top, simply because it's so masterfully crafted, and it's a concept that is truly unique. It's one of a kind, and the way in which they were able to put this album together and give it to the people was just phenomenal. You know, they didn't need to have any fancy gadgets or gimmicks. The music here is really what stands on its own, and it's part of the reason why Dream Theater has the legendary following and the legendary attachment that they really do, because this album is easily one of the best concept albums ever. It's number 2 on this list, but it's also a true testament to what Dream Theater as a band is able to do whenever they're kicking on all cylinders. But that brings us to number 1. We finally get to do it. For a long time now, whenever we've talked about Queensryche, it's been negative. But we finally get to talk about Operation Mindcrime. Operation Mindcrime is probably one of the best, if not the best, concept albums of all time. This is one that was made in a time during the band's career where they had traction. They had, you know, they were a band that was well known, but this was going to put them over the top. This was going to give them a huge fan base along with their follow-up Empire. And this was going to really bring this idea of the concept album back into the forefronted view, because even though we spoke about some of these other bands that were from that same era in the latter portions of the 1980s, it was still not something that was on the tongues of everybody, especially whenever it came into the heavy metal department. So a lot of people figured it was just glorified noise. But this is a disc that is one of a kind. It's unique. The story is being told uniquely, track by track. It's one of the albums where, instead of going with a traditional 10 to 12 song idea for an album, was not afraid to go above and beyond that. Call of Duty have shortened little introductions, either that or ways to advance the plot of the story. It's very similar to what Nightfall on Middle Earth by Blind Guardian did, only Nightfall on Middle Earth did that a little bit too much and was reading the text kind of word for word. It's one of the reasons why it's not on this list, but it would be on any list that sort of followed. But this was one that the uniqueness of it was based around its originality. It was based around all of the debate that it sparked. It was based around the unsurety that you had of the ending. You don't really know what happens. Then Mindcrime 2 came out and was a huge disappointment. It was a classic example that if you have something that's that unique, if you have something that draws that much charm, there's no real need to do anything more with it. Let that mystery kind of last forever. Let that mystery be what's talked about for ages and ages to come. I mean, yes, we're still talking about the original Mindcrime here on this list, and I'm sure various other individuals are talking about the album. However, with Mindcrime 2, it does diminish the legend a little bit, because Mindcrime 2 would not be on this list in any way, shape, or form. It's just not as well put together. It's, in fact, just not really that good of an album, period. However, Mindcrime 1 was one that certainly helped further establish the Queensryche legend, and definitely brought more of a light to modern day at the time of the 1980s, the later 1980s, of modern day concept albums, and really drew a lot of interest and inspiration to individuals in the future, and did a world of good for progressive metal and progressive rock, as well as heavy metal. This is one that has universal appeal and has had a universal effect on the heavy metal genre, whether people want to admit it, whether Jeff Tate detractors want to admit it or not. There you have it, 10 great heavy metal concept albums. This list could go on and on and on, because there's just a plethora of great ones out there. I'm sure that you'll have ones that you felt should have been on here that you'll post in the comments below or over on the Facebook group. I definitely invite you to do that. Perhaps post your list. Perhaps maybe some of the ones that you post will be on a list that we make to further this right here, because I don't think that this is going to be the last that we talk about it. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.